This video was edited by Omar of Hardware Pod. Be sure to check out his channel in the description below. And now, on with our feature presentation. December 31st, 2002. We're over at Spartan Stadium in San Jose, California for the third installment of the Silicon Valley Football Classic, with this being a battle between the 7-5 Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets out of the ACC and the 8-5 Fresno State Bulldogs out of the Western Athletic Conference. For Fresno State in particular, this was a monumental game, as this team had not won a bowl game since winning the Freedom Bowl all the way back in 1992, having gone a decade without a bowl win, and having not just lost their last 4 bowl appearances, but having played in the Silicon Valley Football Classic in each of the past 2 seasons, and losing both of those games, losing the inaugural installment of the game in 2000 to Air Force, and the 2001 installment to Michigan State. If Fresno State can pull off the win in front of, essentially, their hometown fans, seeing as this game was being played less than 150 miles away from their home, then they can have quite the New Year's celebration and get the monkey off of their back. And sure enough, that's exactly what they did. Because when the final whistle sounded, in an absolutely mud-soaked affair where the field looked more like a pig pen than it did an actual football field, and where the field looked like something straight out of 1940s football, the Bulldogs prevailed, coming back late in the fourth quarter and erasing a 21-20 deficit to win the game 30-21. It was not a pretty game for the Bulldogs by any means, as they committed 10 penalties, had to punt 7 times, and lost 2 fumbles. However, thanks to a great rushing performance by Rodney Davis, who had 157 yards on the ground, and thanks to a stellar defensive effort in the secondary, where the Bulldogs picked off the Yellow Jackets 6 times, the Bulldogs finally did it. They got their elusive bowl win that they've been coveting for a decade. And at last, what had been the de facto home team of the Silicon Valley Football Classic got a much-needed and well-deserved victory. But what you might not know is that this almost never happened. And I'm not talking about Fresno State making a bowl game, or Fresno State winning this one. I'm not talking about anything that actually happened on the field. Rather, I'm talking about the fact that this bowl game, the Silicon Valley Football Classic itself, was this close to never happening. Because whereas most bowl games 1 month beforehand were trying to figure out what teams they were going to have play in their game, the Silicon Valley Football Classic was wondering if they were even going to have a game, period. It was a dire situation that we're going to take a deep dive into today, because this is the story behind the disaster of the 2002 Silicon Valley Football Classic. Before I talk about the actual troubling question behind the bowl, we need some context to understand what the original plan was and just how quickly things went haywire. As you can probably expect, running a bowl game costs a lot of money. You need to pay for staff members. You need to pay to rent out the stadium. You need to pay for organizing costs. You need to pay to get the teams themselves to come to the game. And you need to pay for gift packages to give to each of the teams. All of this can add up very quickly. And in total, the Silicon Valley Football Classic was running up a bill somewhere in the ballpark of $2 million per year. So how do you get that money back? Aside from ticket sales, you get it through having sponsors and through having a television deal. Fortunately, when the Silicon Valley Football Classic started off in 2000, they had that taken care of relatively easily. Even though the bowl did not have a corporate naming sponsor, which would have given them about $1.2 million, and that was a huge amount of money that was being left on the table, they were able to get some sponsors and get a television deal. Fox Sports Net signed a 5-year deal with the bowl games starting in 2000 to televise the game, and some corporate sponsors signed on, with the most notable one of the bunch, Knight Ridder, giving the bowl games some much-needed money. That sponsorship made sense, seeing as Tony Ridder, the chairman and chief executive officer of Knight Ridder, was on the bowl game's board of directors. Money was a bit tight, especially since the game did not have that coveted corporate sponsor, but thanks to schools in the WAC ponying up a combined $400,000 to cover some expenses, thinking that the money put in for this bowl game was worth it, since they would otherwise be left out of the bowl picture, and the exposure was much needed for the conference, everything worked out for the first 2 years. And then came 2002. And oh man, did everything fall apart. For one, that 5-year television deal with Fox Sports Net, Fox pulled out of that after just 2 years. There was no official statement or no official reason given for why Fox Sports Net tried to get out of that contract so desperately. But based on the ratings for the bowl game in 2000, we can definitely speculate as to why. During the 2000 season, there were 25 bowl games played, of which Silicon Valley was the only one played on Fox Sports Net. Of those 25 games, Silicon Valley had, by far, the lowest rating of the bunch, holding a Nielsen rating of just 0.6. Every other bowl game drew a rating of at least 1, and this was the lowest rated bowl game at least since the 1997 bowl season. The average rating for a bowl game in 2000, taking out Silicon Valley, was a 4.9. Granted, that number is somewhat skewed with the BCS games, since those drew double-digit ratings. But still, you can see why Fox Sports Net was frustrated that they were televising a game that no one was really watching. They pulled out of their TV contract in November, just 1 month before the game was set to be played on December 31st, 2002. And even though Silicon Valley supposedly had a backup plan, as they were trying to work out a deal with ESPN2, ESPN refused to announce anything. So that was up in the air, as nothing was done just yet. So now, not only did Silicon Valley not have a naming sponsor, but they did not have a television deal, which is kind of important. And it gets even worse. Because remember how I said that one of the first sponsors of the game was Knight Ridder? Prior to the 2002 installment of the game, they dropped out, as did another one of their corporate sponsors, Palm. And if that wasn't bad enough, 2 staff members, who were responsible for financial, marketing, and game operations, saw the writing on the wall, and things got so bad that they quit, meaning that the San Jose Convention and Visitors Bureau, a completely out-of-house organization, took over all of those responsibilities. By this point, the Silicon Valley Football Classic had nothing. Oh, and to make matters even worse, as if that was somehow possible, each bowl needed to present a line of credit to the NCAA by November 1st, which was done to make sure that the bowl was financially viable, and that it could pay everyone necessary. By November 1st, the Silicon Valley Football Classic owed $1.5 million. By November 1st, you guessed it, the game had not paid that money to the NCAA. Translation, this bowl was in serious trouble. We were a month away from the bowl game being played, and we weren't even sure if this game could be played, with no sponsors, no television deal, and with no money. And not even the bowl executives were sugarcoating the matter and assuring people and the Western Athletic Conference that things were fine. They sounded about as sure as a student trying to answer a question from their teacher after getting cold called and not paying attention. Said Chuck Sheldon, the executive director of the game, "As far as I know, we have the finances to run this bowl and have this game," which doesn't sound very confident. Saying "as far as I know" to whether or not you have the 7 figures necessary to host a bowl isn't the greatest vote of confidence. And when Dan Fennon was asked about whether the game would be played in 2002, 1 month out, he said, quite simply, "I can't tell you that." I mean, points for honesty, I guess, but it was clear. This bowl was in serious, serious trouble. Which raises the question, how the heck did they pull this off? How the heck did the game that you've been watching this whole time, the 2002 Silicon Valley Football Classic, wind up getting played when they were in such dire straits? Well, the NCAA granted the bowl game an extension through December 2nd to come up with the money, which isn't a lot of time to come up with $1.5 million, but it is better than nothing. And it's a great irony that the bowl game designed to help the WAC ended up screwing over the WAC, because the only way for this bowl game to be played without a corporate sponsor, without too many other partners, with all of the expenses, and with a small TV deal from ESPN2 at the last minute, was to take money out of WAC hands. The bowl game was designed to pay $750,000 to each team participating. It's how you get teams to come over by paying them money. And even though $750,000 was on the lower end of things for bowl games, that's still a hefty amount of money. And while Georgia Tech got their $750,000, as they wouldn't play otherwise, Fresno State, as in the representative from the WAC for the third straight year, only got $250,000. The $500,000 extra that they were originally supposed to get, that was put toward ensuring the survival of the bowl game. And even though Fresno State accepted these parameters for 2002, realizing that this was for the greater good of the conference and wanting to reward their players for a successful season, even they were extremely hesitant about this bowl game, with Scott Johnson, the associate athletic director for the school, saying, "We've got to take a hard look at this," and saying that if asked to return to the game under similar circumstances in 2003, they might decline. On top of that, remember how the WAC committed $400,000 to cover the expenses in 2001? In 2002, the conference committed a whopping $1 million. Fresno State, for the benefit of the conference, was bleeding money for this game to be played, as the only way for the bowl game to come up with the $1.5 million needed to make the payment, with no outside help from sponsors, was to get $1 million from the conference and to take $500,000 out of Fresno State's pocket. The fact that the bowl game actually survived up until 2004, when you consider those circumstances, is remarkable, because how they were not dead in the water after 2002, and heck, how they even played a game in 2002, I have no idea. Your guess is as good as mine. I posed the question in my video about a bowl during 2002 that had similar troubles with South Florida and the Seattle Bowl, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. How much would you be willing to do in order to play in a bowl game? How much money would you be willing to bleed to make sure that your school and your conference got even the tiniest bit of national exposure? Well, we know the answer when it comes to Fresno State and the WAC in 2002. Because in 2002, if not for the generosity of the conference and the school when it came to a poorly run bowl game, and if not for Fresno State to willingly take a pay cut of 2/3 to play in this game and take a pretty big financial beating, the C in Silicon Valley Football Classic wouldn't have stood for classic, but rather would have stood for cancel. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.